He wanted his child to be relieved from the poverty of the tribe where he was living. But little girls in that area are not educated, and there are no schools nearby anyway. But he had a great desire that his little girl would be educated, and so he got up at 5 o'clock every morning, put his little girl over his shoulder and carried her for 4 hours across the hills and across the rivers and put her in school. He waited all day, and then he carried her back again in the evening. He would get home about 9 o'clock at night. But because he was a farmer scratching out a meagre existence in the forest, by doing this 3 days a week for a year, his little farm suffered. And so that's when this evangelist asked me if I would take this little girl. And so, as I like to say, the walls of Rehoboth are made of elastic. And so when we have another need, we can always stretch to include another one. But it wasn't just one. One day the other children came and they said, "Mummy, there's a lot of children just standing outside." And 2 of these men from that tribe had brought 17 little girls. And there they all were, standing there. Just little ones, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, and they only knew their own language of Malto. They didn't know any English, they didn't know any Hindi, they didn't know any Malayalam. And so what you do with the little girls, and you can't speak to them. Well, there's always the language of love, isn't there? And so you put your arm around them and bring them in. And today they are doing well at school and come on top of their class in Malayalam. We had another 2 who came from the Bhojpuri tribe. They also didn't know our language when they came. But today one of them has trained as a teacher and has gone back to her tribe. And another one is completing, her sister is completing a nursing training. And this is our prayer, that all who come to Rehoboth will come to know and love the Lord. Because that's how I went to India. The Lord said to me many years ago, "How much do you love me? Do you love me enough to go anywhere I ask you to go?" And so I said, "Yes, I love you enough to go anywhere you ask me to go." And that's what I want for all of our young people at Rehoboth, that they will so love the Lord, and so love His Word, and so love His people, that wherever the Lord asks them to go, they will respond with joy and say, "Yes, here am I. I'd love to go there." And then the girls grow up and they need to be married. And it's a joy to say that 20 of the girls, over 20, have married evangelists. And they are now in different parts of India. But it's still my privilege and responsibility to choose the husband. I can't remember how many I've married or chosen the husbands for, well over 60, 70, I don't know. It's always a great responsibility, one that I take with much fear. It's 2 people's lives that are in your hands, in a sense. But let me tell you the story of the last one. She was married just before I came home to New Zealand this time. Her name is Sharon. Sharon came when she was just a baby, newborn. And we trained her and she became a nurse. She was a lovely girl. And so she has finished her nursing training. It was time for her to be married. And so I had a friend who was working in Bahrain, and I said to him, "Do you have any young men over in your assembly? If in your travels you find some young men and they're looking for wives, would you tell them that I have some nice girls in the orphanage?" And I didn't hear any more for a little while, and I thought he had forgotten. But then one day, on that wonderful new gadget called a computer, on the email there was this message, and it said, "There's a boy here and he's prepared to marry one of your girls, but he wants a BSc nurse." And I said, "Well, I've got some good nurses, but they are diploma nurses. They don't have a degree. They're not degree nurses." And so this young man, his name was Stanley, he said, well, I really wanted a nurse who had a degree. And at the time when he was talking to me on the internet, I had another young friend with me. And he said to Stanley, oh, I know Sharon. Sharon's a good girl. She'd make you a good wife. And so the boy said, after a little bit of talking to and fro, all right, I'll marry Sharon. And so then I said, well, I better go and ask Sharon. And so I went and said to Sharon, Sharon, there's a nice boy here. Would you like to be married to him? And she said, well, if Mummy says so. So we didn't know the boy, but I knew the man who had brought the proposal, and I could trust him. I know that he would never do any harm to Rehoboth or to any of my girls. And so I was able to say, I'm sure he's a good boy because this brother has recommended him. And so Sharon said yes. And so then I went back and I talked to him and I said, okay, when do you want the marriage to take place? And this was the end of April. And he said, at the end of May. And I said, well, I won't be here at the end of May. I'm going to New Zealand. And at that time I had planned to come on the 5th of May. And so he said, all right, I'll see if I can get leave and we'll have the wedding on the 4th of May. And so an engagement took place. Sharon and Stanley had not seen each other, but the assembly where Stanley went wrote to the assembly where Sharon goes, and vice versa. And so the wedding was settled for the 4th of May. Stanley came and saw Sharon for about 10 minutes the day before the wedding. And then the wedding took place, and we had a lovely wedding. And then, just before I came home to New Zealand, Stanley came and he said to me, Mummy, I understand Sharon. I understand where she's come from. And I want to tell you that I will be to Sharon, her mother and her father, her brothers and her sisters, and the best husband she could ever have. Don't ever worry about Sharon again. So isn't God gracious? What a lovely story. And we just commit little Sharon and Stanley to the Lord and know that He'll watch over them and bless them and keep them and use them. Stanley previously did Bible study for 3 years, and I'm sure that one day he will come as an evangelist and he will work along with Sharon in sharing the gospel. And so God has given us this beautiful privilege, but a great responsibility. Will you pray for me in this responsibility also? Because it's a very big thing to choose the husbands for the girls. But I'm glad to be able to say that all of those girls are happily married. We have many dreams for Rehoboth. We have the boys' orphanage and the girls' orphanage. But some years ago I had a desire that the young people of our area and other areas would be able to study the Word of God. And so after a lot of prayer, we decided to start a Bible college. 8 years ago we had a rented building and we took in just a few students, boys and girls, and they did a 4-year course in studying the Word of God. Then we decided that we would have an ongoing intake, 20 every year, which would give us 60 students at a time. But this year we have 65 students doing a BTH course, that's a Bachelor of Theology, and 12 students doing their Master of Divinity. The Master's course is new this year. A lot of these young people wanted to continue their studies. One of the girls wants to go to Africa and translate one of the tribal languages into that language. And so she is doing Hebrew and Greek so that she'll have a greater understanding of how to translate. After 2 years of having a rented building, we had to vacate the rented building and we needed a building of our own.